Okay, let's see what else we have here. Like Lopax was talking about the GULO pseudogene. Yes, a lot of the so-called pseudogenes are not actually broken genes. We have known functional roles for them. Okay, for example, a lot of these so-called pseudogenes actually work towards regulating the translation of their protein coding counterparts. And another incredible role for pseudogenes that they're still studying and looking into is that the RNA that's produced by a pseudogene, RNA can actually act. This is the decoy hypothesis. They can act as a decoy for things that might target the correct RNA for degradation from the protein coding counterpart, which actually would work towards increasing the lifespan of that specific mRNA and therefore increase the amount of translation. And this is very similar to why ERVs look like retroviruses, is because they have to carry out their functional roles. And pseudogenes might look like their protein coding counterparts because they have to have that design in order to carry out some of their functional roles. Now, there are different kinds of pseudogenes, like unitary pseudogenes. They're known to be playing a functional role in gene regulation, since they are part of the functional transcription families. And so the whole junk DNA paradigm, it's been completely overturned. It doesn't work. But to this question, we do have deleterious mutation accumulation. We have a growing genetic load in the biological world where mutations are accumulating, and most of them are accumulating unchecked because they are nearly neutral. They're slightly deleterious. They're not damaging enough to where selection can see them. And so they are invisible to selection. That means they're subject to genetic drift, and they drift, they spread, and they result in genetic sickness. And so even though a lot of these so-called pseudogenes are now shown directly in the conventional literature to be functional, they're not broken genes. There are some broken genes because there has been 6,000 years, or specifically 4,500 years since the flood, where deleterious mutations have been introduced into populations, and they have degraded the genomes of biological organisms. They result in genetic sickness. And so we do have some broken genes for sure. And the so-called GULO pseudogene could be an example of a true broken gene. Now, what we have, though, is environment dictating a lot of genetic changes, okay? And so we have hot spots for that reason. We have similar environments that biological organisms exist in, and we have similar sequences that are prone to breaking down in a similar way. For example, in the winter, all kinds of modes of transportation, they sometimes struggle to be turned on, where you got to, kickstart the battery. You got to jumpstart the car because there's problems with the cold weather. Okay. Or you might go on a car lot and you can go look at the SUV section, the sedan section, the hatchback section, and the van section, and you can find rust marks, depending on how old the car is, in similar spots on different vehicles from different manufacturers. Does that mean that they all inherited those rust spots from a common sedan ancestor in the Arctic? No. Similar environments lead to similar mistakes, similar areas, let's say in cars, of breaking down. And in the genomes of living organisms, for example, with the GULO pseudogene, if its only function is to synthesize vitamin C, well, it's interesting because we humans, we get plenty of vitamin C from our diet. We eat a lot of fruits. We eat a lot of vegetables. Today, we take supplements. We take a lot of vitamin C supplements. And so a gene like that doesn't necessarily need to be conserved or preserved by natural selection, because even if that gene breaks down, we're still consuming vitamin C from our environment. And if biblical creation is true, which we know it is based on all the incredible evidence, then Adam and Eve were created in a garden on an earth filled with environments that have vegetables, that have fruits. And those vegetables and fruits would lack the kind of chemicals and negative effects that we know exist today. And so they would have had plenty of fruits and vegetables and healthy food to eat. And so perhaps their GULO gene was designed with a different function. And perhaps we don't know what that function is yet. Or it was designed to produce more vitamin C into early humans, okay, which would have been beneficial for many reasons, including longevity, living longer, fighting off sicknesses, so on and so forth. But over time, it broke down because of how much external vitamin C we were getting. There's papers in the conventional literature that talk about how the GULO gene across the biological world, even in unrelated organisms that evolutionists might look to convergent evolution to explain the origin of a lot of these genes and systems, they have broken GULO genes because those are our organisms or animals that get a lot of external vitamin C from fruits, vegetables, and foods. And so it's a really weak argument to say, oh, we got this vitamin C producing gene and it's broken in several different creatures, including guinea pigs, including chimpanzees, and human beings. Yeah, that is a gene that's prone to breaking down. So even if that's a true genetic mistake, that can be broken independently in different lineages due to environment and mutational hotspots. Okay, Rosina, very desperate comment. Sedans don't reproduce though. Okay, well, here's the thing. Adding reproduction adds more complexity and raises another problem for the naturalistic evolutionist. Doesn't it, Rosina? But this is also a straw man of the creation position, because what we say, or I specifically say, is that starting from Genesis, God creates man in his own image. And so there must be something about us that reflects the divine. And for that reason, we can build models and we can come up with various hypotheses. And so if there's something about us that reflects the divine, perhaps we can get an idea into how God designed the biological world and how he created based on the way we design things. Well, it turns out that human engineers design in homologous patterns. Human engineers design in nested hierarchical patterns. Human engineers are just catching up now the ways God has designed the biological world. For example, there's epigenetics, and there's these built-in switches in biological organisms. There's millions of them, and they can be turned on due to an environmental stimuli that leads to rapid adaptation. Well, modes of transportation now in 2024, 2025, a lot of the higher end ones, they have these built-in safety mechanisms. Lane change, for example, if you're starting to swerve off, there's a built-in mechanism that moves the car back into the lane and starts driving straight again. Or you have these signals where if you're coming too close to a car, there'll be a beeping noise. Or there's all kinds of these built-in mechanisms now for safety. When in fact, the biological world, we've known now through sophisticated study that there's these built-in mechanisms. And so again, we can get an idea into how God may have designed based on the way we design things. And reproduction, that is a way God is designed. He is above. He is infinite, highly more complex than us. So imagine if we could design vehicles with the ability to self-replicate. That would save a lot of money. I'm sure car manufacturers would love if they could design, let's say, 10 basic vehicles, whatever the vehicle is, and then hit a switch, and then those vehicles just self-replicate. That's beyond our comprehension, because God is so beyond what we can do. And so the fact that he designed the biological world with the ability to reproduce, pass on their genes, pass on their traits, and adapt, that's incredible. And so this is just a straw man of what we're saying. It's the fact that we as humans build in homologous patterns. We build in nested hierarchical patterns. We even design interesting transitional like vehicles. For example, the invention of crossover SUVs that blend the features of vans and SUVs. They resist classification. They are now their own classification. Crossover vehicles. You don't really want an SUV. You don't really want a van. And so you go with a crossover, something right in between. Or the military, they've invented military amphibious assault vehicles, where on its own, they wouldn't really be good in just a land environment or a water environment like the ocean or the sea, but they're perfect. These military amphibious assault vehicles are perfect for that transitional environment between sea and land. Whereas a ship is not good on land and a tank is not good in the water. But that military amphibious assault vehicle is perfect for that transitional environment. And so human engineers are building these things because it's good design. There's an effective purpose. And so when you look in the biological world and you see what you would interpret as transitional or mosaic, like Tiktaalik or Archaeopteryx, or even these mammal-like reptiles, that again is confirmation of this model, because we see so many similarities and analogs between the design world and the biological world. And Rosina, I do appreciate the engagement, but you're going to have to step up your game. These arguments are not working. They're not addressing these points. Alex G, $5 super chat. I appreciate the support. You guys are the life and blood. Geo plays piano. I try to answer your ERV question, but granted, you seem to be the most knowledgeable young earth creationist I've ever heard. Well, I appreciate that. Appreciate the compliments. And so, okay, well, if Geo plays, again, I always enjoy the interaction in our live chat. This is how we model build. This is how we refine our position. As I am a strong advocate of addressing criticisms, interacting with challenges, rather than existing strictly in echo chambers, we want to engage the opposition in order to refine our positions, to discard bad arguments, to discard or improve upon various models. Because we could have a good model, but there's some errors within the model. Well, when we interact with people who disagree with us, like skeptics and critics, we can find out what works and what doesn't. And as a result, we build an even stronger model. Because it's not only important to refute evolution, which it's pretty easy to refute evidences for evolution. Chromosome 2, ERVs, homology, nested hierarchies, the ordering in the fossil record, vestigial organs, you name it. They're all quite easy to refute. What's more important is to model build. We want to offer a superior model to the evolutionary model. Rather than just attack evolution, we want to offer and construct a superior model. And that's what we do here on Standing for Truth. Matt and I, we have an active research project where we are actively researching these issues, these technical issues like ERVs, like pseudogenes, mutation rates, for example, how mutation rates point to the Bible as being true. We've literally discovered our first parents, the first couple, Adam and Eve, directly in our genetics. Mutation rates and Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA are fast. Overall diversity in these uniparentally inherited DNA compartments. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down maternally, Y chromosome paternally. Overall genetic diversity in these DNA compartments is low. There's only a few separating any two people. And that's biblical time, because with a fast mutation rate and low diversity, it doesn't take a whole lot of time to accumulate those DNA differences. You can't take those levels of diversity back 100 to 200,000 years to an out of Africa scenario or an evolutionary origin of humans. You simply can't. And so let's see if our good friend Sydney Raptor has addressed anything yet. Sydney Raptor, let's see what assertions he has for us tonight. Just speculations. Nope. I've given you evidence based on real data. For example, you looked at ERVs and pseudogenes, and I show you through the conventional literature these incredible functional roles that you can't account for in the evolutionary model or naturalistically. You can speculate, you can come up with just so stories, you can imagine, but your evolutionary science, your evolutionary philosophy is not empirical. Assertions? No. I've given you evidence. I've given you arguments backed by evidence, not just assertions. What you're doing here is an assertion. And cherry picking science, not even close. In my ERV book, in my debates and my presentations on ERVs, I have dozens and dozens of papers going over all of these numerous functional roles in ERVs, determining cell types, acting in gene regulation and gene expression, embryological development, acting in the immune system, acting in cell stress responses, okay? Performing viral mimicry. This is all throughout the conventional literature, but you, Sydney Raptor, you're so out of date on what's taking place in the conventional literature on these technical issues that you have to assert that this is cherry picking. Okay, this is a you problem and not a me problem or a creationist problem. Really bad analogies. Well, that's funny because even those in your camp early on would use similar analogies where you have the design world and the biological world with these incredible analogs. Now, evolutionists like Sydney, they don't like analogies because they are appealing to 95% of the population. Because Sydney Raptor and other evolutionists, their goal is to basically talk over everybody's heads, and so that people can be deceived like children and say, wow, look at that teacher. Look at that evolutionary biologist. He must be right because he's using a lot of technical lingo. No, what I like to do as a creationist when I'm teaching or refuting arguments is give you the technical details, but then break it down in a way that the layperson or the everyday person can understand. And how you do that is through analogies, and analogies work. But Sydney Raptor and evolutionists that believe they're related to banana plants and strawberries, they don't like good analogies because it shows how unscientific and how illogical the evolutionary position is. And so Sydney Raptor still failing. Sydney Raptor, I have never argued ERVs and pseudogenes. Okay, Sydney Raptor, then what is your best evidence for why you are apparently related to whales, puppy dogs, strawberries, and banana plants? Okay, because it is your camp that consistently asserts that the best evidence for evolution are ERVs, pseudogenes, junk DNA, chromosome 2 fusion, nested hierarchies. But as we've shown over and over again, we've completely dismantled and overturned the so-called best evidence for common descent. And so without that so-called best evidence, what are you left with? A whole lot of nothing, unfortunately for you. And so Geo plays piano. I appreciate the healthy engagement. If you'd like more from me on ERVs, shoot me an email, standfortruthministries@gmail.com, and I'm happy to send you some resources that I think you'll find valuable. Geo plays piano. Good question. So you acknowledge transitional species. I don't acknowledge the amount or degree of transitional species that we should find if evolution were true or common descent. But I do agree that we find some interesting mosaics, like your therapsids, Archaeopteryx, Tiktaalik, just to name a few. But that's what we would expect if the model that I'm putting forth is true. Again, we're made in the image of God according to the Bible. We should be able to get a sense for how God designed based on the way we design things. And I've got a whole presentation where I go over these interesting so-called transitional-like vehicles. And so humans are designing in very similar ways to how the biological world is organized or designed. And so I'd love to see a contradiction to that. We even have in the design world what evolutionists would consider by their philosophy and logic as junk. For example, vehicles are built with a spare tire. You have 4 tires, the car's moving as intended. Why do we have a spare tire in the back of the car? Isn't that redundant? Isn't that junk? Isn't that just evolutionary leftover? No. Vehicles are built and designed with a spare tire for a reason. It's forward thinker. It's forward thinking, which points us back to the forward thinker who designed it that way, these engineers. Well, God has designed the biological world with a lot of redundant elements, with a lot of redundancy, with a lot of over design, with a lot of backup code. And so that's forward thinking. And these forward thinking mechanisms point us back to the forward thinker, who is God, specifically the God of the Bible. And this is a huge topic right here. It's a great topic, a huge topic. Geo Plays Piano asks, how do you explain hominid fossils? And so hominin, more accurately, would comprise, according to the evolutionary model and the way the term is used, that would comprise everything in the human line and everything external or outside the human line, like the Pan lineage or gorillas, orangutans, so on and so forth. And so hominin evolution would focus on your Australopithecines like Australopithecus afarensis, Australopithecus sediba, Anamensis, but it would also go into the Homo group like Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthals. And so what I would recommend, just because I need to start winding down here, we're going at 3.5 hours, is we did a seminar on the out of Africa theory, but also the hominin fossil record with an authority on the topic. In the creation world, in my opinion, the authority on that issue is Dr. Peter Line. He studied it extensively. His model in explaining so-called hominins is the most consistent from the young earth creationist position. And so I do recommend checking out that seminar we did, I think 2 months ago, but we went for 4.5 hours. He alone in that seminar gave a 55-minute presentation on Lucy, on just Lucy, focusing on every single detail. Now, in a nutshell, there are a lot of similarities between humans and Australopithecine apes and extant apes. Okay. And that's fine because creationists can explain both similarities and dissimilarities. Now, through what's called baraminological analyses, they've actually found enough discontinuities in morphology, anatomy, and genetics. Specifically, the genetics applies to extant apes and humans. We don't have genetics of extinct Australopithecine apes. So when it comes to extinct Australopithecine apes like Lucy and Africanus and Littlefoot and so on and so forth, we have morphological and anatomical data that when analyzed statistically, we find strong enough discontinuities, it's called, to separate them in terms of ancestry, where we have separate ancestry. Too many discontinuities for evolutionary paleoanthropologists to account for between Australopithecines and humans, modern humans and so-called ancient humans like Erectus, Neanderthals, Floresiensis, Naledi.